It's time to put a new clutch in my Pan America. In order to replace the clutch on the Pan America, I need to remove the outer primary cover. In order to do that, I need to remove the exhaust header. In order to do that, I need to remove the muffler as well as the skid plate, engine guards, lower fairings, and foot peg bracket, as well as the center stand. But before I start taking all of that apart, I'm going to run the engine to warm it up so I can drain the engine oil out first. While that oil is draining, I'm going to go ahead and pop off the front fairing so I can then remove the main fuse. Skid plate is next. Followed by engine guards. And then we can remove the lower fairings. First, we need to disconnect the connector, the wire connector for the signal lights. And those are a bit tricky to get to. They're up in the same little caddy where the main fuse is, and it's a really tight fit in there. Get that connected. Get the wire out of the way. Then you remove 3 T25 Torx screws, one here in the front, 2 on the back, and then a larger T27 Torx right back up in here. And we do need to remove the left side as well. Then we can remove the 2 T30 screws that are securing the radiator in. If you do have a radiator guard, just go ahead and get that out of the way. Then you carefully lift the radiator up and off of the bottom supports so that you can move it away from the engine. Now on to the back half of the bike. If you have a muffler guard, that's going to have to come off. Then I'm ready to remove the center stand. And for that, first we need to take the spring off. And the way I like to take the spring off is I take a big flat screwdriver, I wrap the end in some tape, get it in here so that I can then pry to pull the spring off rather than trying to just use a spring puller. But I also use a little spring puller down in here just so that I have control of this once it comes off of here. And as you can see, it's still a little tricky. Use that spring puller to guide it over that little nub. And there we go. Remove the center stand pin retainers and the pins. Then it's a T27 to remove the 2 little bolts that hold the heel guard in place. And then we got a little cotter pin that connects the master cylinder to the brake pedal that we need to get to and pull out. That lets you pull out the little pivot pin. And then we can go up to a T30 to remove the master cylinder bolts. We can move the master cylinder out of the way. Just going to set it there for now. And then I believe all that I have left is this T40 bolt at the top securing the foot peg bracket through the swing arm pivot. Now, if you didn't have a muffler guard installed, you'll have another bolt down here that you need to remove as well. And there we go. foot peg bracket removed. Now I am going to zip tie the master cylinder brake line up here, just so that this thing isn't dangling and putting any pressure on the brake line. Now I'm ready to remove the back half of the exhaust. The book says remove the muffler first, then the bread box. I'm going to see if I can just remove it as one assembly here. So first we need to loosen up this exhaust clamp. That's a 15 millimeter. Is it? Whoops, it's a 15 millimeter bolt, but that's not a 15 millimeter wrench. There we go. Let's try this one. Come on. There we go. And I did soak this in some penetrating oil before starting this. Knock that clamp loose a little bit. There we go. Slide it forward. And then we have a T40, right? Yep, a T40 fastener right here that we need to remove. All right. And then just one last T40 at the rear muffler bracket. All right, let's see if we can just slide this whole thing off. There we go. The front header mounts directly to the cylinder head. There's two 12 millimeter nuts, and again, good idea to get these soaking in some penetrating oil before you tackle this. These actually weren't on too bad. And the rear head pipe is two pieces separated by a clamp that you undo with a 10 millimeter ratchet. And then I'm just using a screwdriver here to kind of walk this clamp back over the flange. There we go. All right. I'm sure there's probably a better way to do that. And it turns out there is a better way. I was trying to get the outer metal band over the seal that is inside there, and you don't have to do that. Once this is loose, this whole thing can stay on the header pipe that you're removing, and it will slip off of the little extension piece that's going to the rear cylinder. But now, whoops, we forgot something. We forgot O2 sensors. They gotta come off. For that, you just unclip the two connectors on top of the starter. There we go. All right, so I know that I was completely blocking that shot, but here you can see those connectors, and they are color coded, so you won't screw it up when you go and put it back together. There we go. With the exhaust out of the way, we have access to all of the primary cover bolts, but we got to do one more thing before we can take it off. We need to disconnect the clutch cable from this lever here. And to do that, we got to go on the other side of the bike so that we can use the clutch cable adjustment to add in a bunch of slack, loosening this up to where it will come off. Now we're finally ready to remove the outer primary cover. There are 10 bolts securing it to the engine that you can remove with an 8 millimeter socket. Once you get the primary cover off, next we have this little plastic oil baffle underneath the clutch pack. Now that the primary cover is out of the way, we can see our clutch assembly here. And if all we need to do is replace some slipping clutch plates, then you're going to want to slowly and evenly loosen the 3 bolts that are holding the spring pressure plate in. Once they're backed out, you can remove those bolts and the plate and 3 springs. And then we can remove the pressure plate and clutch release bearing. Now we can pull out all of the friction plates and steel plates. And as you do this, it's a good idea to make sure that you're putting them in the same order. Even though these are not going back into the bike, you can use it as a reference when you're putting in your new plates, because some of them are different than the others. So if all you need to do is replace the clutch plates, you would put your new ones in at this point. Now, new clutch friction discs should be soaked in the same oil that you run in your engine. The book says for at least 5 minutes. But then you put your new plates in, same order that the old ones came out, and then you put your springs and your pressure plate back on and evenly tighten it down all the way. In my case, I need to replace the entire clutch assembly. To remove this, I actually need those friction steels back in the clutch basket. The reason being is I need to remove this center nut to pull the basket assembly out. However, if I were to put a socket on there and try and undo it, the whole assembly is just going to free spin because the bike's in neutral. Now I could put it in gear, but now I'm going to be putting that stress through the transmission gears, whereas I really want it locked to the drive gear coming off the engine. So not only do I need to have these discs back in, these plates back in, but we also need to put our pressure plate back on and our springs and the retainer plate. Now with it all reassembled, I need to remove the clutch release bearing. There's a little snap ring in here. Make sure you don't let that go flying across the shop. And then the bearing pulls right out. Once this clutch release bearing is out of the way, that exposes the nut that we need to take off, and it's a 12.24 millimeter. But before I just go in here and cranking to get that loose, I need to secure the engine from turning and rotating as I'm doing that. Now, Harley makes a special tool, of course they do, to do this, and it's a bit of a pain, even if you have that tool. So underneath the starter here, let me get you in here to see that, there's a brass plug, and once you remove that brass plug, that allows this special tool that Harley makes to thread in there and go into a hole that's machined into the flywheel to lock it and hold it. So you also need to get the flywheel in position to have that hole, that machined hole in the flywheel line up with that hole in the crankcase. To rotate the engine, you want to turn it with the rotor, which is right behind this cover plate here. That's a couple of 8mm screws. And this cover is held in place with an O-ring, so it doesn't pop right out. I have a small flat blade screwdriver with some tape wrapped around the tip of it to try and minimize the chance of scratching anything. Just kind of get in there and work that loose so you can get behind it. This inner bolt here is what secures the rotor onto the crank. So, but I don't want to turn that one. There's the outer nut that's in there. It's a 36mm, and that's actually a machined part of the rotor itself. Now, Harley, of course, makes yet another special tool that will fit in there to go over that machined nut. I found that a cheap Texton 36mm socket that I got on Amazon fits in there with barely any room to spare. I actually bought this thinking I would have to grind it down a little bit to make it a little bit more thin-walled. A big impact size socket is not going to fit in there. I'll leave a link in the description below where you can grab one of these because it is a perfect fit. If I was going to rotate the engine to line up that machined hole in the flywheel so that I could use that crank lockout pin, I would have to pull the spark plugs to do that so that I could turn this freely without fighting compression. And the spark plugs on this engine, because of the crush washer, they're one-time use. Once they're in and torqued, if you pull them out for any reason, Harley-Davidson says you need to discard them and use brand new ones because of that crush washer. But I don't need to rotate this engine to do what I need to do. I just need to hold it still. So you could either enlist a helper to hold and secure this while you work the other side, or you can do something janky like I am and use a strap to hold it down to the foot peg bracket. Oop. Too much slipping with the clutch discs, which means it's time to break out the impact. Now, I do not have an impact socket that will fit in here on that nut, so we're going to do what you're not supposed to do and use a regular socket on an impact. So time for the eye protection. There we go. That made pretty quick work. Now, before I can pull this out, I need to take the spring tension off of the outer gear. To do that, there's a hole right there that you want to use a small screwdriver. I have a little awl that we can put in there and rotate just a little bit, just enough to take the spring tension off is all you need. And then the whole assembly will come right on out. Get that washer that's in there. There we go. And there we go. And don't forget your inner needle bearings. I've taken apart this clutch assembly again just so I could show you folks why I'm replacing the entire assembly for my bike. The issue that I'm having is, if you see these little marks, these are wear marks into the outer clutch basket, being worn in by the little tang on the friction plates, right, as they wear in to that aluminum. And the issue that that's been causing me, as you can see, they're all the way around in here. And the issue that that's been causing me is, once the bike is warmed up, I would say this happens after I've been riding for a bit and everything's getting nice and hot, it would be hard to get the bike into neutral. And sometimes as I would disengage the clutch to shift, it wouldn't disengage smoothly. It would almost feel like it would pop. And what's happening is those wear marks, like I can actually feel them with my fingernail. They're, it's no longer a smooth surface. So those wear marks are causing the clutch plates, those to get caught up and stuck because they can't move smoothly and freely. So they kind of get caught until they have enough, pressure to kind of jump over that little imperfection. And we have matching wear marks all on the inner clutch hub as well, contributing to the issue. Why did it develop that much wear and tear after 18,000 miles? I'm not sure. It could be because when I ride off-road, I get lazy with the clutch, with my shifting actually, and sometimes when I really should be downshifting to a lower gear to make it up a hill, on dirt and gravel, sometimes I'm, too lazy and I don't do that, and instead I just kind of ride and slip the clutch, obviously putting more wear and tear on it. I also use this bike when I am teaching motorcycle courses, intermediate and advanced courses, and so that's just a lot of low-speed parking lot range drills, a lot of engaging and disengaging the clutch that might have contributed to it as well. So for now, I'm just going to replace the entire clutch assembly with another Harley-Davidson one, and we'll see how it lasts for the next 18,000 miles. If it has issues again at such little mileage, then I'll probably look into see what the aftermarket has available. Over at the workbench, I've had my new clutch friction plates soaking in some engine oil, the same oil that I use in the bike. On your inner clutch hub, you're going to have these two springs, one being a flat one here that goes in first, and then you're going to have this concave one, and that goes in on top so that it's beveled outward from the clutch hub here. There's a flat washer that goes on the back of the clutch hub, in between that and the outer basket. Then I'm ready to start assembling the friction plates and the steel plates. We have 5 of the wide friction plates, 3 narrow friction plates, 6 wide steel plates, and 1 narrow steel plate. All right. We start off with one of the narrow friction plates, and then a steel, the wide steel, and then a wide friction. And then we just continue alternating the wide steels and the wide frictions. Until we place the last wide steel plate. Then we do a narrow friction. And then the narrow steel. Now that narrow steel is not going, the teeth on that are not going to engage the inner clutch hub. And then our last narrow friction, but this one gets installed offset, so rotate it from the slots that all the other friction discs plates went into. The teeth on the pressure plate is what's going to engage the teeth on that last narrow steel plate that we put in. You may actually find it easier to put the last narrow friction plate and then that narrow steel directly onto the pressure plate, get that properly interlocked, and then install the whole thing, remembering to make sure that those friction plate tabs are rotated and offset before you drop them in. Okay. And just double check now that everything is lined up and that this pressure plate fully seats and there's no gap between it and the friction plate directly underneath, Same with that steel. Make sure that everything is seated down properly. Then I'm ready to drop in my springs and the spring plate. There's a marking on it telling you which side is out. Make sure that the springs are properly seated on the little raised nubs, the raised parts for the springs to go over. Get your bolt started. Then I'm going to use my battery-powered ratchet to run these down evenly so that I'm not having this top plate get out of alignment as it's compressing down. Now I'm only running this down until this spring plate is just even or slightly below the top part of the pressure plate here, and that way I'll do my final torque once I have it installed in the bike. All right, while holding it together, I'm going to flip it upside down so that I can put the new bearing in, and we're going to give this a good coating of oil. And then that just drops in on the back side there of the clutch basket. Again, making sure to hold it all together so parts don't fall out on you. We're ready to now go and put it in the bike. And then carefully slide the whole assembly over the input shaft. Okay. Now once it's almost all of the way in, it's only going to go so far before you have to use your awl or screwdriver to offset the spring tension to line up the gears to be able to push it all the way in. Then I'm going to put my washer in. It is marked as to which side is out. And then a new nut to go over the, to secure the clutch basket to the input shaft. These nuts are slightly deformed. I don't know if you can see that, but so that it kind of grips onto the input shaft, so they're one-time use. And I'm just getting that started until it's finger tight for now. I want to make sure that I have these springs properly torqued first. More so the bolts securing the spring plate properly torqued, which is 71 to 106 inch-pounds. Now I'm ready to run the nut in the rest of the way. And we're setting this to between 125 and 140 foot-pounds. Next, a little clutch release bearing goes in. Followed by its snap ring. And there we go. Now it's time to put it all back together. Now before the primary cover goes back on, this oil baffle goes back in. Long bolt goes on the front side of the motor, or the right side as you're looking at it. And the short one goes towards the rear, or the left side as you're sitting here looking at it. And they both get torqued to between 80 to 97 inch-pounds. Then we can put the outer primary cover on, make sure that the mating surface is nice and clean. And I already have a new gasket installed on the primary cover. Get it lined up on the dowel pins. And you'll need to rotate the clutch release lever so that the mechanism inside the primary catches onto the release bearing. All of the outer primary bolts are the same size, so it doesn't matter which goes where. And I'm just going to run them in just shy of making contact with the case to start with. And then by hand, take them to where they just barely make contact with the case. Now I'm going to go around the perimeter in the proper tightening sequence order, just tightening them until they feel a little snug. Number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. And then follow that same sequence again with the torque wrench, tightening them to between 94 and 115 inch-pounds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Now the exhaust header, we're going to put a new gasket on the head port at the front and a new clamp for the rear section. First, slip the front header pipe over the studs on the front cylinder head, and then slip the rear header pipe over the rear cylinder exhaust extension. And I'm just going to loosely put on the front exhaust nuts on the front pipe. And then begin tightening the rear clamp. And once it starts to get just a little snug, I'll alternate going back to tighten the front again. Now I'm not going to torque anything to spec until I get the muffler on, just to make sure that everything lines up properly. Slip a zip tie in the rear bracket just to kind of hold it for now. And then the front has a hanger it needs to go into. And don't forget to plug your O2 sensors back in. Once everything's in place, go back and get all the clamps and fasteners to their final torque. And I'll have the official torque settings for every fastener involved in this project listed in the description. And then carefully get the radiator back in place. Foot peg bracket. And master cylinder. Don't forget the cotter pin. Rear muffler guard if you have one. Now if you don't have the muffler guard like I do, your screws that mount the rear master cylinder are going to be the same ones that go through the heel plate, right? But with the muffler guard, you get an adapter bracket that moves that master cylinder up well, the master cylinder doesn't move. It moves this heel plate up a bit and offsets it so that it doesn't interfere with the muffler guard. Don't forget to hook your clutch cable back up. This will be easier to see doing it before you put the exhaust header back on. The center stand pins do get a thin coat of anti-seize, and the retaining screw gets a little bit of thread locker. While I'm here, I can remove my engine securing tool and reinstall the center stand spring. Before putting your cover plate back on, check the O-ring that's on here, make sure it's still in good shape. Lower fairings and crash bars. Make sure you don't forget to put the oil back in. Very important part. Put the main fuse in and the cover plate. Don't forget to replace the one on the other side as well. Front fairing. And we're done. Well, almost. I still need to do the cable adjustment, which I'm going to wait to do until I have the bike on the ground, make it easier to reach the clutch lever. And I don't have my skid plate on yet because I want to wait until I have the bike running and heating the oil up just to make sure I don't have any oil leaks anywhere. Now that wraps it up. Now if you find yourself having to make other adjustments to your clutch within, under 1,000 miles, that's normal as the clutch plates are breaking in. So just something to be aware of. As always, ride safe and thanks for watching.